You don't even know what block you're on. Nobody does. Nobody's coming, Abel Booker said, laughing low as he scanned them slowly. 2 women alone behind a bar at midnight. He'd run this play 100 times. It always ended the same way. Behind him, 9 men filled both ends of the alley, shoulder to shoulder, blocking every exit. Despite the intimidation from them, Simone Waverly stood perfectly still beside her sister, Serena Waverly. Neither woman flinched, neither stepped back. Abel Booker and his men had no idea. They weren't just cornering 2 women. They were stacking charges against 2 Atlanta PD major crimes detectives who were already, silently, counting every felony they'd just handed them. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The jasmine hit her before she even opened the bottle. Serena Waverly stood at her bathroom mirror, holding the small glass perfume bottle in both hands like it was something fragile, something sacred. The label was worn smooth at the edges. She'd read it so many times the words had rubbed off years ago. Didn't matter. She knew what it said. Estee Lauder. Youth Dew. Mama June's perfume. Serena uncapped it slowly and touched the stopper to her wrist. The scent bloomed, warm and floral and achingly familiar. And for just 1 second, her mother was alive again, standing right there in that bathroom, humming something low and sweet, the way she always did when she was getting ready for a Friday night. Serena exhaled, set the bottle down. 6 years. It had been 6 years, and the smell still did that to her. She looked at herself in the mirror. Black jeans, fitted blazer, her natural hair pulled back clean. On any other night, she would have left the badge at home. But 23 years of police work had made it part of her body the same way her right hand was. It sat on the nightstand beside her Glock, both tucked under her blazer, before she reached for her keys. March 14th. Every year. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Downstairs. Don't make me wait. Serena smiled despite herself. Simone had not once in 38 years arrived anywhere late. She was the kind of woman who showed up early and then complained about waiting. She grabbed her keys and went downstairs. Simone was leaning against the passenger door of Serena's car, arms crossed, wearing deep burgundy from her turtleneck down to her boots. Mama June's color. Serena's throat tightened when she saw it. Simone looked up, and for one moment, neither of them said a word. They had the same face, same wide eyes, same jaw, same mouth their mother used to kiss on the forehead every single night without fail. And sometimes just looking at each other said the whole thing. Simone opened her arms. Serena walked into the hug without slowing down. They held on for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then Simone patted her on the back twice, the way she always did, and pulled away. "Let's go see Ronald," she said. The drive to Eastwick took 20 minutes. Serena remembered when it used to feel like going home. Now it felt like driving through a wound. The neighborhood she and Simone had grown up in, the one with the barber shop on the corner and the fish fry spot, and the church that shook the sidewalk every Sunday morning, was being eaten alive, block by block, building by building. New condos rose up on Pryor Street, where the old community center used to be. A boutique wine bar sat in the space where Mr. Henderson had run his hardware store for 30 years. Clean glass and exposed brick, where something real used to breathe. Serena drove slowly. She couldn't help it. Simone watched the streets pass with that particular stillness she got when she was angry, but choosing not to speak yet. Then Serena saw the sign. It was strapped to a chain-link fence surrounding a vacant lot on the corner of Eastwick and Delmar. A lot Serena distinctly remembered as a small park where kids used to play. The sign was large, professional, a bright white rectangle against the dark evening sky. Cameron and Associates. Mixed-use development coming soon. Serena's eyes moved over it without breaking her expression. She filed the name away. Cameron and Associates. Something about it sat wrong in the back of her mind, the way a wrong smell sits in a room after everyone else stops noticing it. But tonight was not for that. She pulled her eyes back to the road. Half a block later, the warm amber light of June's came into view. The hand-painted sign above the door, the potted plants on either side of the entrance that Ronald watered every single morning without fail. The bar looked exactly the same as it had the first night Mama June brought them here as teenagers. Exactly the same as it would look, God willing, until they were old. Serena pulled into the parking spot out front and cut the engine. For a moment, both sisters just sat there. "You ready?" Simone asked quietly. Serena looked at the sign above the door. June's. Just that. Just her name. In plain white letters. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." They got out of the car together and walked toward the light. Ronald Curtis had the door open before they even reached the steps. He was a big man. Broad shoulders, close-cut gray at his temples, hands that looked like they'd been built for hard work and used that way. He stood in the doorway of June's, with his arms spread wide, and his smile was the kind that started in his eyes first. "There they are," he said. "My girls." Simone walked straight into the hug. Serena was half a step behind. Ronald wrapped both arms around them at the same time and held them the way a man holds people he's known since they were children, like he was genuinely glad they existed. Come in," he waved them through. "I already poured." Inside, June's was exactly what the world outside was not. The lighting was warm and low. Old wood paneling on the walls, framed photographs everywhere. Atlanta through the decades, local jazz musicians, a few candid shots of regulars who'd been coming here since before Serena and Simone were born. Etta James was playing through the speakers, just loud enough to feel. Not so loud you had to raise your voice. 4 regulars sat at the bar. 2 couples shared a booth near the window. A man in the corner nursed something amber and read a folded newspaper like it was still 1987. Nothing had changed. That was the whole point. Ronald led them to their usual table, the round one near the back, close to the wall, where Mama June used to sit, so she could watch the whole room at once. 2 glasses of Knob Creek bourbon were already waiting. The good bottle. The one Ronald kept on the low shelf and only pulled out on specific occasions. He set a 3rd glass down for himself and stood over the table. "To June," he said. Simply. Like that was the whole prayer. "To Mama," Simone said. "To Mama," Serena echoed. They drank. The evening settled into something easy and warm. They talked about her the way they always did on March 14th, not with sadness at the center, but with laughter. Ronald reminded them about the night Mama June beat every man at this bar in a spades tournament, and then stood up, smoothed her dress, and said, "I don't know why y'all look surprised." Simone nearly knocked her glass over laughing. Serena told the one about the Christmas she was 12, when Mama June tried to make her grandmother's sweet potato pie from memory and confused salt for sugar. The whole family ate it anyway, because nobody wanted to be the one to tell her. They found out later she knew the whole time and was testing them. "That woman," Ronald said, shaking his head slowly. His voice was soft with it. "She was something else." "She really was," Serena said. They ordered food. Ronald brought it out himself. Smothered chicken, rice, cornbread that was still warm in the center. They ate without hurrying. Simone started doing impressions of people they'd grown up with, and at one point she had Ronald laughing so hard he set his glass down too fast and bourbon sloshed over the rim onto his hand. "Look what you made me do," he said, still laughing, reaching for a napkin. "That's your own fault," Simone told him, completely serious, which made him laugh even harder. Serena watched the two of them and felt something loosen in her chest. She reached for her glass, took a slow sip, let herself just be in the room. But somewhere between the second round and the cornbread, Ronald got quiet. It happened gradually. A pause that lasted a beat too long, his eyes drifting toward the front window. Serena noticed. She always noticed. It was the same instinct that made her a good detective. The ability to read a room, to feel the shift in a person before they said a word. And something in Ronald had shifted. The smile was still there, but underneath it was the face of a man carrying weight he'd stopped mentioning, because mentioning it hadn't helped. 2 more close this month, he said eventually, not looking at them. Leonard's barbershop, and the flower shop on Delmar that Miss Ellen had been running since 1991. He paused. Gone. The table went quiet. Simone set her glass down. Serena said nothing. She didn't need to. She just let it sit there in the air between them, because some things deserved that. Ronald shook his head, then looked back at them and put the smile back on. But not tonight. Tonight we're celebrating. He raised his glass again. They met it. 20 minutes later, Simone's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen. Her work partner. She looked up at Serena with a grimace. 1 minute, she mouthed, already standing. She grabbed the phone and headed toward the back hallway, past the kitchen, toward the rear exit where it was quiet enough to talk. Serena watched her go, then turned back to Ronald. She didn't think anything of it. Not yet. The alley behind June's was narrow and dark. Simone stepped through the rear exit and let the door fall shut behind her. The noise of the bar disappeared. Out here, it was just the sound of the city at night. Distant traffic, a dog somewhere 2 blocks over, the low hum of a street lamp mounted above the exit door. She pressed the phone to her ear. Yeah, I got it, she said. Send me the file in the morning. I'll look at it then. A pause. I said I'll look at it tomorrow. It's Mama's birthday. Another pause, shorter. Good night. She hung up and stood there a moment, letting the night air cool her face. The bourbon had settled warm in her chest. Inside, Ronald was probably already refilling Serena's glass without being asked. She smiled at the thought and turned back toward the door. That's when she heard the footsteps. Not one set, multiple, deliberate, coming from the far end of the alley, where the shadows were thickest. Simone's hand moved to her side before her brain fully caught up. 12 years of instinct. She stayed still and watched. 3 men stepped into the edge of the light. They were not stumbling out of a bar. They were not taking a shortcut. They moved like men who knew exactly where they were going and had already decided how the conversation was going to go. The one in front was shorter than the other 2, but walked like he was in charge of something. Work boots, a canvas jacket. He stopped about 10 feet from Simone and looked her over the way you look at furniture you're planning to move. Bar's gonna need to wrap it up tonight, he said. Sooner the better. Simone looked at him steadily. Excuse me? You heard me. He tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. This whole block's been purchased. Management's already been notified. We're just making sure everybody understands the situation. And who exactly is we? He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. The people who own this block now. Simone kept her voice even, flat. The voice she used in interrogation rooms. I'm going to need you to step back. All 3 of you. The man tilted his head. Or what? Or this becomes a situation you don't want. She held his gaze. I'm law enforcement. Step back. He didn't move. Neither did the 2 behind him. Inside June's, Serena glanced at the hallway for the 3rd time. Simone had been gone too long. 5 minutes for a quick work call was normal. 10 was not. Serena set her glass down and pushed back from the table. Be right back, she told Ronald. She moved through the back hallway, past the kitchen, and pushed through the rear exit. The alley hit her all at once. Not just the 3 men on Simone's end, but 7 more materializing from the opposite direction, stepping out from the gap between buildings on the other side of the exit, cutting off the only other way out. Serena counted fast. 10 total. Positioned at both ends of the alley like this had been planned. Like they'd been waiting. Because they had. At the front of the group stood a man she hadn't seen yet. He was big. Not tall exactly, but the kind of wide and solid that filled up space. 50-something, thick neck, short gray hair. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the March chill, like the cold didn't apply to him. His arms were crossed over his chest, and he was smiling. A slow, easy smile that said he found all of this mildly amusing. Abel Booker looked at the two women in the alley and didn't seem concerned at all. "Well," he said pleasantly, "two of you. That's fine. Message works the same either way." He started walking toward them slowly, unhurried, the way a man walks when he's certain nobody's going to stop him. "This neighborhood is changing," he said. "Has been for a while now. Some people get that. Some people need it explained to them." He glanced around the alley, at the back of June's, at the old brick walls. "Your friend Ronald's had plenty of time to read the room. Hasn't quite gotten there yet. So here we are." He stopped in front of Serena. "Close. Too close. Take the hint," he said, "while it's still just a hint." Then he reached out and wrapped his hand around her forearm. Serena looked down at his hand. She looked back up at him. Her face was completely calm. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then, in one motion, neither twin having signaled the other, no word exchanged, no look shared, both women reached into their blazers. Two Atlanta PD detective shields came out simultaneously, held flat and steady at eye level, catching the dim light of the alley lamp. Gold. Official. Unmistakable. Serena's voice came out low and clear. "Detective Serena Waverly. Atlanta PD. Major crimes." Simone's voice landed right behind it, like a second knock on the same door. "Detective Simone Waverly. Atlanta PD. Major crimes." The alley went silent in a way that had nothing to do with quiet. It was the silence of 10 men recalculating. Fast. 3 of them stepped back immediately, one nearly tripping over his own feet going backward. 2 more drifted toward the alley wall like they were trying to become part of it. Serena tracked every movement without turning her head. She had already counted them coming in. She was counting them now. Booker's hand dropped from her forearm. The easy smile he'd been wearing since he walked in, the one that said, "I own this alley and everyone in it," faltered. Just for a second. But she saw it. She was meant to see it. Serena lowered her badge slowly. She didn't put it away. "The moment your hand made contact with my arm," she said, "that became criminal assault on a law enforcement officer." She let that land. Let it sit in the air between them while Booker's jaw worked silently. "That's a felony in the state of Georgia. You understand that?" Booker said nothing. "I want to make sure you understand that," she said, "because understanding it matters for what happens next." She turned her head, deliberately, unhurried, and looked down the alley. Her eyes moved from face to face. She held on 4 of them for just a beat longer than the others. Long enough to be intentional. Long enough for those 4 men to know they had been seen. Memorized. Stored. "I have 4 of you," she said simply. "Enough for a lineup. Enough for charges." She looked back at Booker. "The rest of you are free to leave. But you will be found. All of you." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then they did. It wasn't a panic. It was something quieter and more revealing than that. Men who'd spent years in alleys like this one, doing exactly this kind of work, suddenly finding out the math had changed. They peeled away in 2s and 3s, moving back toward the ends of the alley without running, without looking at each other, without saying a word. The ones who'd been most aggressive on the way in were the quietest on the way out. Simone watched them go with her arms loose at her sides and her badge still in her left hand. Booker didn't move. He stood his ground for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes moving between the 2 women. Something was working behind his face, pride wrestling with something more practical. He was a man who was not used to backing down. That much was obvious. The kind of man who'd spent enough time being untouchable that he'd started to believe it was a permanent condition. He looked at Serena. She looked back at him. Waited. Then Simone took one step forward. Just one. Slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world and nowhere else she needed to be. Booker looked at her, then back at Serena. Something shifted in his eyes. A decision being made, dressed up as something else. He uncrossed his arms, smoothed the front of his shirt. "This ain't over," he said quietly. "No," Serena agreed. "It isn't." He held her gaze for one more beat. Then he turned and walked toward the far end of the alley. Slow, like it was his idea, like he was choosing to leave rather than being left with no other option. They watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Then the alley was empty. Simone let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. She looked at her sister. Serena was still watching the spot where Booker had turned the corner. "Happy birthday, Mama," Simone said. Serena turned to look at her. And then it hit them both at the same time. The absurdity of it, the release of it, all that adrenaline with nowhere left to go. And they started laughing. Not polite laughter, real laughter. The breathless, slightly disbelieving kind that only comes after your body realizes it was braced for something that didn't happen. Simone pressed a hand to her mouth. Serena shook her head. "Come on," Serena said finally, still catching her breath. "Let's go tell Ronald." They turned and walked back through the rear exit together, back into the warmth of the bar, back into the smell of good food and old wood, and Etta James still playing soft through the speakers. Behind them, the alley was quiet and still, for now. Ronald looked at them when they came back through the kitchen hallway and knew immediately that something had happened. He set down the glass he was drying. "What?" he said. Serena pulled out her chair and sat down. Simone sat across from her. They told him, all of it. The 3 men at the far end of the alley. The 7 more cutting off the other side. Booker, the hand on Serena's arm. The badges. All 10 men walking away. Ronald listened without interrupting. His face moved through several things while they talked. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked uncomfortably close to shame. Not his own shame, the shame of a man who'd been carrying a secret he hadn't wanted to burden anyone with. "Third time," he said quietly when they finished. Serena went still. "What?" "That's the 3rd time in 2 months." He set both hands flat on the table. "Different men each time, same message. First time it was 2 of them, caught me locking up out back. Said the block was changing and I should think about my future here." He paused. "Second time they followed my waitress, Keisha, 22 years old. Followed her all the way to her car after her Friday night shift. Just stood and watched her get in. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to." Simone's expression hardened. "I filed reports both times," Ronald said. "Went right down to the district precinct. Filled out the paperwork myself." He shook his head slowly. "Never heard a single word back. Not one." The table was quiet for a moment. "You should have called us," Simone said. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want to make it your problem." "Ronald." Serena waited until he looked up at her. "It already is." The evening ended, without the lightness it had carried an hour before. They stayed another 30 minutes, enough to finish what was in their glasses, enough to make sure Ronald wasn't sitting alone with all of it. Serena told him to document everything he remembered from both previous incidents. Dates, descriptions, anything said. She told him not to file another report with the district. She would handle the report herself in the morning, as a law enforcement officer, which meant it couldn't be quietly set aside the way civilian complaints sometimes were. Ronald nodded, walked them to the front door, hugged them both again at the threshold, longer this time. Nobody said happy birthday on the way out. The next morning, Serena was at her desk by 8. She wrote the incident report herself, methodically, the way she'd written hundreds of them over a 23-year career, the last 11 of those in major crimes. Every detail precise, 10 individuals. 1 act of criminal assault by contact on a law enforcement officer. 4 individuals identified for potential lineup. Ringleader identified by name, Abel Booker. She noted the prior incidents reported by Ronald Curtis, the lack of any follow-up response from the district, and the pattern of organized harassment targeting a black-owned business. She submitted it through the standard channel and flagged it for expedited review, given the assault on a sworn officer. She went home, made coffee, waited. By noon, her phone rang. Captain Yvonne Draft, her direct supervisor, calling from the precinct on her personal line, which meant this was not a routine call. "Close your door," Draft said when Serena answered. Then she seemed to remember Serena wasn't at the precinct. "Where are you?" "Home." A pause. "Serena, your report's been flagged." She set her coffee cup down. "Flagged by who?" "Deputy Commissioner Voss's office." Draft's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a woman choosing every word. "It's been marked for contextual review before any action is taken." Serena knew exactly what that meant. She'd been a cop long enough to know what it meant. Contextual review was the language used when someone with enough rank wanted something to disappear without technically making it disappear. "He's burying it," Serena said. Draft didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. "I'm telling you what I know. Keep your head down while I see what I can find out on my end." The call ended. Serena sat at her kitchen table for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then she picked up her phone and called Simone. Simone answered on the second ring. "They flagged the report," Serena said. "Voss's office. It's already being buried." Silence on the other end. Then Simone's voice came back. Quiet, certain, with an edge to it that Serena recognized from every investigation they'd ever worked separately and every hard conversation they'd ever had together. "Then we dig," Simone said. Simone was still on the phone with Serena when her other line lit up. "Ronald." She told Serena to hold and switched over. His voice hit her immediately, tight, clipped, the sound of a man trying to hold himself together by talking slowly. "They put something on my door," he said. "A notice. City of Atlanta. Official letterhead. The whole thing. Fire egress obstruction. Rear alley." He exhaled hard. "Simone, they're saying I've got 30 days to fix it or they start closure proceedings." She closed her eyes for 1 second. "When did it go up?" "Had to be this morning. I got here at 10 to open, and it was already taped to the front door. And there were men outside, 3 of them, walking the perimeter with cameras, photographing everything. The exterior, the alley, the property line next door." His voice dropped. "They didn't even try to hide what they were doing." "Don't touch the notice," she said. "Don't call the number on it. Don't let anyone inside without a warrant. I'll call you back." She switched back to Serena. "You heard that?" "Every word," Serena said. "Start pulling records." Simone spent the rest of that afternoon at her kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad. She started with Cameron and Associates, the name from the development sign Serena had pointed out the night before. Public property records, city acquisition filings, business registration documents. It was all there, available to anyone willing to sit down and look. Most people never looked. She looked. The first property acquisition was dated 3 years ago. A dry cleaning business on Eastwick Avenue, family-owned, operating for 19 years. 6 weeks before the sale, a city code citation had been filed against the property. Electrical panel deficiency. The owner applied for a remediation permit. It was denied. 3 weeks later, Cameron and Associates made an offer. The owner sold. Simone wrote it down. She pulled the next one. A hair salon on Delmar Street, code citation first. Plumbing irregularity. Permit denied. Sale to Cameron and Associates followed within a month. She pulled the one after that. A small grocery on the south end of Eastwick. Code citation. Permit denial. Sale. She kept pulling. 11 properties. 3 years. The same sequence every single time. Citation, denial, sale, running like a machine that had been calibrated and tested until it never failed. And every displaced owner, without a single exception, was black. Simone sat back in her chair and looked at what she'd written on the legal pad. 11 names, 11 businesses, 11 families who had built something in a neighborhood they belonged to and had it systematically taken from them through paperwork. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and breathed. Then she kept going. She cross-referenced the property records with the police incident reports filed by each displaced owner. She already knew from Ronald that reports went nowhere. She wanted to know exactly where they went. Every single closed report, all 11, carried the same authorization stamp at the sign-off line. Deputy Commissioner Conrad Voss. Not a pattern of negligence. Not an overworked department dropping the ball. One man's name on every document, closing every complaint that could have interrupted the machine before the next property fell. Voss wasn't failing to act. He was acting. Deliberately. Consistently. For 3 years. Simone stared at his name on the page until the letters stopped looking like letters. She photographed every document. The property records, the code citations, the permit denials, the closed police reports with Voss's stamp. She organized everything into a single folder on her phone. Then she gathered the printed pages, stacked them, and drove to Serena's apartment. Serena had the door open before she knocked. They didn't speak while Simone spread the papers across the kitchen table. Serena stood beside her and read as each page went down, her eyes moving carefully, methodically, the way they moved over evidence. Simone watched her read and said nothing. When the last page was down, they both stood over the table in silence. The legal pad sat in the center. 11 names, 11 properties, 3 years, 1 stamp. Serena said it quietly, almost to herself. He's been running interference for years. Simone nodded. Her voice was flat, with something that hadn't become anger yet, but was getting there. And nobody stopped him, she said, because nobody was looking. The call came in at 8:45 the next morning. Serena was on her second cup of coffee, still in yesterday's clothes. The property records from Simone's research spread across her kitchen table, where they'd left them the night before. She picked up on the first ring when she saw the number. It was a Eastwick exchange. Old neighborhood. Serena, baby. The voice was thin and uncertain. It's Tessie. Tessie Tatum. From the old building on Marsh Street. Serena sat up straight. Miss Tessie. Yes, ma'am. I hear you. I got some papers a couple weeks back. A pause, the sound of rustling. A man called me after. Said I had 60 days. Said I needed to... She stopped. Baby, I don't fully understand what it's saying, and I don't know who else to call. Don't do anything with those papers, Serena said. She was already standing. Don't call that number back. I'm coming to you. The drive to Marsh Street took 14 minutes. Serena parked in front of the old building and sat in her car for a moment before getting out. 4 stories. Tan brick. The same chipped concrete steps she and Simone had run up and down 10,000 times as kids. The same black iron railing their mother used to grip on cold mornings. Somebody had planted a small pot of flowers near the front entrance. Purple petunias, still alive despite the March chill. That was Miss Tessie. That had always been Miss Tessie. Serena got out of the car and went inside. Miss Tessie May Tatum answered the door in her housecoat and slippers, her white hair pinned back neatly, the way she always kept it. She was 79 years old and had lived in apartment 2B for 40 years. She had attended Mama June's funeral. She had brought food to the twins' door for 2 solid weeks afterward, without being asked. She stepped back to let Serena in, and Serena walked through the door and stopped. The same narrow hallway. The same kitchen visible at the end of it. The same window above the kitchen sink that looked out over the back alley. The one their mother used to stand at while she washed dishes, looking out at nothing in particular, humming to herself. Serena stood very still for just a moment. Then she followed Miss Tessie to the kitchen table and sat down. The documents were already laid out, a small stack, neatly squared at the corners, because Miss Tessie was a neat woman. Serena picked up the top page and read it. It was a buyout offer from Cameron and Associates. 4 pages of dense legal language structured to bury the actual meaning as deep as possible. The compensation figure was printed on page 3, halfway down, in the same size font as everything around it so it wouldn't stand out. Serena found it. She read the number twice. It was less than a third of what the apartment was worth on the current market. "A man called after I got this," Miss Tessie said. She folded her hands on the table. "He said the building had been purchased. He said 60 days. She looked at Serena carefully. He said it like it was already decided. Serena set the papers down. She pulled out her phone and opened the Cameron property map Simone had built the night before. She already suspected before she looked. She looked anyway. Marsh Street. The old building. It was there, flagged and numbered. Next on the list. 12 properties. Not 11. This one just hadn't been announced yet. Serena placed her phone face down on the table. She looked at Miss Tessie. This woman who had known her mother, who had slipped grocery money under their door during the hard months when Mama June was between jobs, who had braided Simone's hair on Sunday mornings when their mother worked double shifts. This machine had already pushed their mother out of this neighborhood 25 years ago. Now it was coming for the woman who'd stayed. "Miss Tessie," Serena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You are not signing anything else. You are not calling that number. You are not opening your door to anyone you don't personally know." She held the old woman's gaze. "Do you understand me?" Miss Tessie studied her for a moment. Something in the old woman's face settled, the tightness around her eyes releasing just slightly. "You sound like your mother when you talk like that," she said softly. Serena's jaw tightened. She breathed through it. "I'll handle this," she said. "I promise you." She gathered the documents, folded them carefully, and put them in her bag. Then she sat with Miss Tessie for another 20 minutes, long enough to make sure she wasn't alone with it. Before she stood, kissed the old woman on the cheek, and walked back out through the narrow hallway, past the kitchen window, past the place where Mama June used to stand. They divided the work the same way they'd divided everything since they were children. Serena took the documents. Simone took the people. While Serena stayed at her apartment tracing the Cameron LLC structure through its layers of shell companies, Simone spent the next 2 days driving across Atlanta with a list of names pulled from the property records, 11 displaced business owners, 11 addresses, 11 front doors she intended to knock on. She started on Tuesday morning. She finished Wednesday evening. She recorded every conversation on her personal device with each person's explicit consent, stated clearly at the start of each recording. Legally obtained. Admissible. She took notes by hand as backup. By the 6th interview, her handwriting had gotten smaller and tighter without her noticing. The first was Danny Evander, 61, who had run an auto shop on Eastwick Avenue for 22 years. He met Simone at his kitchen table in the apartment he'd moved into after the sale, smaller than what he'd had, on the other side of the city, away from the neighborhood he'd spent his whole adult life in. He told it plainly. 3 separate incidents of vandalism over 4 months. Windows smashed, tools stolen, his compressor destroyed with something heavy. He filed police reports after each one. Nothing came of any of them. Then came the code citation. Then the permit denial when he tried to fix what the citation flagged. Then the offer from Cameron and Associates, delivered by a man in a clean suit who sat across from Danny in his own shop and told him this was the best deal he was going to see. Danny sold. He didn't have another option left. 22 years, he said. He wasn't angry when he said it. That was the part that hurt most. He was just tired. My father helped me build that lift with his own hands. We poured the concrete floor ourselves. He looked at the table. They put a wine bar in there now. The second was Nicole Frank, 54, whose hair salon on Delmar Street had been denied a business renewal permit 4 consecutive times, each denial citing a different technical irregularity, each one fixable, each fix followed by a new reason. By the 4th denial, her lease had lapsed, her clients had moved on, and the offer from Cameron was waiting like it had known exactly how long to be patient. The third was the Park family, James and Helen, both in their 60s, who had run a sit-down restaurant called Magnolia's on the south end of Eastwick for 18 years. A city health inspector arrived unannounced on a Saturday lunch service and cited 14 violations. James had the receipts for every repair, every cleaning cycle, every equipment certification. The inspector took his documentation and left. The violations stood. The restaurant closed 6 weeks later. Helen Park cried twice during the interview. James held her hand and stared at the wall. Simone kept her voice even and her recorder running. By the time she reached the 6th interview, a woman named Carolyn Reese, who had operated a small bookshop on Marsh Street for 11 years, Simone was holding herself together by pure discipline. The details had stopped surprising her. That was its own kind of horror. She had heard this story enough times that she knew the shape of it before the person across from her finished a sentence. Citation, denial, harassment, offer, sale. 6 people. 6 versions of the same crime, committed with paperwork and patience, and the absolute certainty that nobody was going to stop it. She sat in her car outside Carolyn Reese's apartment building for a long time after the final interview. 6 recordings saved. Notes organized. Hands resting in her lap. She thought about Danny Evander's father helping him pour the concrete floor. She thought about Helen Park crying at her own kitchen table. She thought about Carolyn Reese showing her a photograph of the bookshop, the hand-painted sign above the door, the window display she'd arranged every single week for 11 years. All of it gone. Replaced. Erased. She picked up her phone and called Serena. 6 testimonies, she said, when Serena answered. 12 properties now, counting Miss Tessie's building. 1 man's stamp on every buried report. She paused, looking through the windshield at nothing. But I found something else today. I was cross-checking district command history while you were working the LLC trail. Another pause. Longer this time. Voss was the district commander here in 1998, Serena. She heard her sister go completely still on the other end. Mama June filed a harassment complaint that year, Simone said quietly. Against her landlord, right here in Eastwick. She stopped. Voss's precinct closed it without any follow-up. The line was silent for a long moment. Then Serena said, "Send me everything." Serena didn't sleep. She lay on top of her bed covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling until the room went from dark to gray to the pale, flat light of early morning. Then she got up, washed her face, and made the call. Walter Tate had been her training officer 23 years ago. He was retired now, had been for 6 years, but he still had friends inside the department's records division. More importantly, he still had access credentials that nobody had gotten around to revoking. It wasn't something either of them discussed directly. It was just a thing that existed, like a spare key left under a mat for emergencies. "I need archived district records," she told him. "Eastwick Precinct, 1998. Civilian complaint filed by a June Waverly." Their mother. "Waverly?" A pause on the line. "That your mama?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "Give me an hour." The documents arrived in her email as a scanned PDF, 2 pages. The scan quality was poor, the kind of faded, slightly crooked reproduction that came from old paper run through an overworked machine. But the words were legible. Serena printed them and sat down at her kitchen table. She read slowly. Mama June had filed the complaint in April of 1998. Serena was 13 years old that spring. She didn't remember any of this. Her mother had never mentioned it. Not once. She read the complaint in her mother's own words, transcribed by whoever had taken it at the front desk, and the shape of it was horribly familiar. A landlord named Cody Elmer. Sustained harassment over a 4-month period. Noise complaints filed against Mama June's unit. Fictitious ones, designed to build a paper record against her. False damage claims submitted to the building management company alleging her apartment had been deliberately damaged. An attempt to void her lease on those grounds. Mama June had written down everything, date by date, incident by incident, in the precise and careful way of a woman who knew she was going to need proof. She had taken it to the Eastwick District Precinct and asked them to intervene. The complaint was received on April 9, 1998, stamped and logged by the duty sergeant. 11 days later, it was closed. Disposition. Insufficient basis for police action. Matter deemed civil in nature. Serena's eyes moved to the bottom of the page. The closing officer's name. Above it, the supervising commander's signature, required for all complaint dispositions. Commander Conrad Voss. She set the page down. She picked up her phone and opened the property records Simone had compiled. She found the Marsh Street building, the one where they'd grown up, where Miss Tessie still lived. She traced the ownership history backward. The building had been sold in 1999, 1 year after Mama June's complaint was buried. She found the buyer. Not Cameron and Associates, a company called Eastwick Capital Holdings, LLC. She ran that name against the Cameron corporate filings Serena had spent 2 days untangling. It took her 20 minutes to find it. Buried 3 layers deep. A dissolved predecessor entity absorbed into Cameron's structure in 2009. Cody Elmer, the landlord who had harassed Mama June out of her home, had sold to a company that was the direct ancestor of Cameron and Associates. The machine wasn't 3 years old. It was at least 25, and Conrad Voss had been covering for it the entire time. Serena drove to the City Records archive on her own, in her personal car. She sat in the parking lot for a while before going in. Inside, she requested the district command logs from the Eastwick precinct between 1995 and 2002. The clerk took 40 minutes to pull them. Serena sat in a plastic chair and waited without moving. She found 4 more buried complaints in that 7-year window. Different landlords, different addresses, all in Eastwick, all filed by black residents reporting harassment, all closed within 2 weeks of being received, all signed off by Voss. 4 complaints, 4 closures, 4 properties that changed hands within a year of each closure, all eventually absorbed into what would become Cameron and Associates' portfolio. Voss hadn't stumbled into this arrangement. He had been part of it from the beginning. A career built on burying the voices of an entire neighborhood, one complaint at a time, so that a machine could quietly consume everything those people had built. He had done it to strangers. He had done it to her mother. Serena walked back to her car and sat in it. The afternoon sun was going down over Eastwick, turning the sky above the half-demolished skyline a deep, bruised orange. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at it for a long time. She didn't cry. She had passed the point where crying was what the feeling wanted. Eventually, she started the car and drove to Simone's apartment. Simone opened the door and looked at her sister's face. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't say a single word. She just stepped back and let her in. Simone made coffee while Serena talked. She stood at the kitchen counter and listened without interrupting while her sister laid it out. Voss's signature on 4 more buried complaints going back to 1995, the predecessor company that connected Cody Elmer's harassment of Mama June to the Cameron portfolio. 25 years of the same machine running under different names with the same man covering its tracks. When Serena finished, the kitchen was quiet, except for the coffee maker. Simone poured 2 cups and set one in front of her sister. "We can't take this inside the department," she said. "Not through the normal chain." "No," Serena agreed, "but there's one person we can take it to." They requested a private meeting with Captain Yvonne Draft the following morning. Draft cleared her afternoon calendar without asking why. She met them in her office with the door shut and the blinds angled down, and she listened the way a good commanding officer listens, without her face giving away what she was thinking, without interrupting, without reaching for her phone. They laid everything on her desk. The property records, the LLC structure, the 11, now 12, acquisitions, the 6 victim testimonies, the cross-referenced police reports with Voss's authorization stamps, the 1998 Mama June complaint, the 4 additional buried complaints from the archive going back to 1995. All of it organized, documented, and sourced. Draft looked at the last page for a long moment after they finished talking. Then she looked up. "I have a contact in internal affairs," she said. "Deputy Chief Norman Darwin. He operates on a separate chain of command from Voss, reports directly to the Commissioner's office, not through the Deputy Commissioner track." She paused. "If I go to Darwin directly, Voss doesn't see it coming until it's already moving." "How fast can you get to him?" Serena asked. "Today," Draft said. Darwin reviewed the preliminary package that same afternoon and called Draft back within 2 hours. It was actionable. Clearly and immediately actionable. He placed an informal administrative hold on Ronald's code violation proceedings while the inquiry was formally opened, meaning the 30-day closure clock stopped. He also issued a notice to the district that Abel Booker was to be brought in for questioning regarding the assault on 2 sworn officers. Booker arrived at the precinct the next morning with a lawyer. The lawyer was expensive. The kind of expensive that meant a 3-piece suit on a Tuesday, and a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He arrived within the hour of Booker being notified, which told Serena everything she needed to know about who had been called first. She watched the questioning through the observation glass with her arms folded. Booker sat across the table from the interviewing detective with the particular stillness of a man performing calm rather than feeling it. He answered every question with 3 words or fewer. His lawyer interrupted when anything approached specificity. But Booker's eyes moved, to the mirror, to the door, to his lawyer's face, in the small, involuntary way of a man who understood that something had shifted and was still calculating how much. He wasn't comfortable. That was enough. For now. That evening, the twins drove to June's. Ronald already knew about the hold on the code violation. Draft's office had notified him directly. When Serena and Simone walked through the door, he was standing behind the bar with the good bourbon already out and 3 glasses lined up. He didn't say anything when they came in. He just poured. They sat at their usual table, the round one near the back, close to the wall, and Ronald brought the glasses over and pulled up a chair, and the 3 of them sat together in the warm, low light of the bar, while Etta James played through the speakers the same way she always had. Ronald raised his glass. "To the women who didn't let it go," he said. Simone laughed, a real one, loose and relieved. She touched her glass to his and then to Serena's, and drank. The tension that had been sitting in her shoulders for weeks seemed to drop a fraction of an inch. Serena watched her sister laugh, and Ronald smile, and let herself, just for a moment, believe that the worst of it was behind them. She picked up her glass. She hadn't quite brought it to her lips when her phone buzzed against the table. She looked at the screen. Captain Draft. 9:47 p.m. Draft never called this late, not unless something had broken. Serena set her glass down without drinking and looked at Simone across the table. Simone's smile faded when she saw her sister's face. Serena pushed back her chair and stood up. "I have to take this," she said quietly. She walked toward the front door, pressed the phone to her ear, and stepped outside into the cold March night. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside. Serena pressed the phone to her ear and stood on the sidewalk in front of June's, her back to the window, the warm light of the bar behind her, and the dark Eastwick street ahead. "Talk to me," she said. Draft's voice was controlled, tight in the way of someone who had already processed their own reaction and was now delivering information as cleanly as possible. "Voss found out about the inquiry?" Serena closed her eyes for 1 second. "How fast?" 48 hours. He has someone inside. I don't know who yet, but he moved the moment he found out." Draft paused. "He went directly to Darwin." "And Darwin?" "Darwin is out. He withdrew from the inquiry this afternoon. Cited insufficient preliminary evidence." Another pause. "Serena, Darwin had a disciplinary matter from 11 years ago that was quietly resolved. Voss reminded him of it." Serena said nothing. She stood very still on the sidewalk and let the information settle into her the way cold water settles, all at once, everywhere. "The hold on Ronald's code violation," she said. "Is it lifted? Effective this morning." She pressed her free hand flat against the brick wall of the bar beside her. Breathed. "There's more," Draft said. "Cameron's city attorney sent a formal letter to my office today. It cites interference with legitimate city enforcement proceedings by members of my unit. It's addressed to me by name." Her voice didn't waver. "If either of you continues any form of unofficial investigation, they're threatening formal suspension. They're trying to shut us down before we find anything else?" "They already found something else," Draft said quietly. "Booker's attorney filed a counter-complaint this afternoon. He's alleging that you and Simone used intimidating and threatening conduct during the alley incident. A beat. Voss has flagged it as requiring immediate review. He's moving it forward himself." The street in front of Serena was empty and still. Somewhere down the block, a traffic light cycled from green to yellow to red for nobody. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, though she already knew. "I need you both at the precinct tomorrow morning," Draft said. 8 o'clock. "I'm sorry, Serena. I fought it. I don't have the standing to stop it." Serena went back inside. She didn't have to say anything. Simone saw her face when she came through the door and was already standing by the time Serena reached the table. Ronald looked between them and set his glass down slowly. Serena told them. All of it. She kept her voice low and even, and got through the whole thing without stopping. When she finished, the table was silent. Ronald stared at the wood grain of the tabletop. Simone stood with her arms crossed, jaw set, looking at a fixed point on the wall. They drove home separately that night. The next morning, they surrendered their badges and service weapons at the precinct at 5 minutes past 8. The officer who processed the administrative leave paperwork wouldn't meet their eyes. The hallway outside Draft's office was quiet in the particular way of people pretending not to watch something. Serena signed where she was told to sign. Simone signed without looking at the page. They walked out of the precinct without speaking. Ronald called Simone at 2 that afternoon. June's had failed re-inspection. A city inspector, not the same one who had conducted the previous inspection, a different name entirely, one that didn't appear anywhere in the district's regular rotation, had walked the property that morning and cited 7 violations. 3 of them were items that had not been cited in any previous inspection in the bar's 20-year history. The 30-day clock was gone. Ronald now had 14 days to remediate or face immediate city seizure proceedings. 14 days. Simone sat in Serena's apartment and looked at her phone after the call ended. She didn't move for a while. Then Miss Tessie called. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Cameron's lawyers had come to her apartment that afternoon. 2 of them, with a revised document and a city official she didn't recognize. They told her the building was going to be cited for structural violations regardless of whether she signed. They told her if she didn't sign voluntarily, she would be relocated without compensation to temporary housing on the other side of the city. They told her she didn't have a choice. Miss Tessie had signed. That evening, Simone sat on the floor of Serena's apartment with her back against the couch and her knees pulled up. The documents were still spread across the kitchen table where they'd left them. The evidence that had felt like a weapon a week ago sat there, doing nothing. "We did everything right," Simone said. Her voice was quiet and flat. "We followed every rule, filed every report, went through the right people." She shook her head. "And they took it all anyway." Serena sat across from her on the floor, back against the wall. She didn't argue with any of it, because all of it was true. The apartment was very quiet. Then Serena said, "We played by their rules." Simone looked at her. "We need to change the game," Serena said. Morning came gray and still. Serena was at her kitchen table by 6 with coffee she couldn't taste, and the full document package spread in front of her the same way it had been for days. No badge on the nightstand. No Glock in the holster by the door. Just the papers and the problem, and the particular clarity that comes from running out of every other option. She started at the beginning. Not the Cameron acquisitions, not Voss's stamps. Further back, the LLC filings, the ones she'd been untangling for days before the suspension hit, and everything else took over. She pulled the printed copies toward her and went through them slowly, layer by layer. Cameron and Associates on the surface. Beneath it, 2 holding companies. Beneath those, a third, a private investment vehicle registered in Delaware. The kind of anonymous structure that existed specifically to ensure that the names attached to it didn't appear anywhere obvious. She found the subpoena stamp on her third pass through. It was on the Delaware filing. Small, faded, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A federal document request stamp with a case reference number. Not city. Not state. Federal. Serena sat back in her chair. Someone else had already been pulling this thread, and they'd gotten far enough to subpoena the corporate filings. She wrote down the case reference number. Then she picked up her phone, not her work phone, her personal cell, and called the FBI's Atlanta field office. She didn't identify herself as a detective. She was on administrative leave. Technically, she wasn't one right now. She asked for the Financial Crimes Division. She was transferred twice. The second transfer connected after 2 rings. Hendry. The voice was brisk and professional. A woman. "My name is Serena Waverly," she said. "I'm calling about a federal subpoena issued to an entity called Eastwick Capital Partners, LLC. I have a case reference number." A pause. Brief, but weighted. "Hold one moment, Ms. Waverly." The hold lasted 40 seconds. When Agent Priya Hendry came back on the line, something in her voice had shifted. Still professional, but focused now. The way a person sounds when they've just confirmed something they were already thinking about. "Detective Waverly," she said. "I was wondering when one of you would call." Simone arrived at Serena's apartment 30 minutes later. They sat across from Hendry at a coffee shop on the west side of the city. Neutral ground, away from the precinct, away from Eastwick, away from anyone who might recognize either twin. Hendry was 40, compact, sharp-eyed, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been patient for a long time and had learned to treat patience as a professional asset. She told them what she could. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had been building a RICO case against the Cameron Investment Group for 18 months. They had the financial architecture, the wire transfers, the shell company structure, the money moving between the Delaware holding company and the 4 silent partners, all of them city officials whose names the twins hadn't yet seen. They had the corporate paper trail going back further than even Serena had dug. What they didn't have was the human layer, the documented pattern of coordinated harassment against individual businesses and residents. The victims, named and on record. The police complicity running through a specific chain of command. The direct connection between the financial crime and the human cost of it. Without the human element, Hendry said, we have financial fraud. Complex, provable, federal financial fraud. She looked between the two of them. With it, we have an organized criminal enterprise operating under RICO. That's a different category of prosecution entirely. Different sentences. different consequences. Simone put the 6 testimony recordings on the table. Serena put the cross-referenced police reports with Voss's stamps beside them. Then the property records, the LLC structure, the Mama June complaint, the 4 additional archived complaints going back to 1995, then the cell carrier records from the night of the alley incident. Booker to Cameron, 4 minutes after the badge reveal. Cameron to Voss, 7 minutes after that. Hendry looked at the cell records for a long moment. "That's the conspiracy's panic on paper," she said quietly. "That's what we thought," Serena said. Hendry gathered everything carefully, methodically, the way someone handles things they intend to use. She looked up. "Bring me the originals to our secure facility. Everything you have. Do not contact your department. Do not signal anyone inside the precinct." She held Serena's gaze. "This goes federal." She stood, shook both their hands, and left. The twins sat across from each other in the booth for a moment after she walked out. Simone stared at the table where the documents had been. Then she looked up at her sister. "Mama would have loved this part," she said. They didn't sleep much. 72 hours. That was the window Hendry had given them to compile and deliver the complete federal evidence package. Everything organized, sourced, and documented to a standard that would hold up in federal court. Not just convincing, but airtight. The kind of package that couldn't be dismissed, buried, or explained away by an expensive lawyer in a 3-piece suit. They worked from Serena's apartment, blinds down, burner phones only, 2 prepaid cells purchased with cash from a convenience store on the west side, nowhere near Eastwick. No contact with anyone inside the precinct. No calls on their personal lines about anything related to the case. Serena took the documents. Simone took the testimony files. They worked at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the same way they'd studied for exams as teenagers. Close enough to hand something across without getting up. Quiet enough to think. Serena built the documentary package from the ground up. She organized the property records chronologically. 12 acquisitions over 3 years, each one preceded by the same sequence of citation, denial, and offer. She attached the corresponding city code citations and permit denials to each property file, cross-referenced with the dates of acquisition. She pulled the Cameron LLC structure and mapped it cleanly on paper. The public company at the surface, the 2 holding companies beneath it, the Delaware investment vehicle at the base, and the 4 silent partners whose names appeared in the federal filings Hendry had already obtained. She added the cross-referenced police reports. 11 closed complaints, all bearing Voss's authorization stamp, all corresponding to properties that subsequently fell to the Cameron machine. Then the archived complaints going back to 1995. Then the Mama June complaint from 1998 with its chain of command traced to Voss's signature at the bottom. Then the predecessor company, Eastwick Capital Holdings, LLC, dissolved 2009, absorbed into the Cameron structure, and the property ownership history that connected Cody Elmer's 1999 sale directly to the machine that was still running 25 years later. She worked slowly and did not rush a single page. Simone organized the 6 testimony recordings onto a single encrypted drive with written transcripts for each. Danny Evander, Nicole Frank, James and Helen Park, and Carolyn Reese, plus the remaining 2 whose stories were equally specific and equally damning. She attached supporting documentation to each testimony, the corresponding code citations, the permit denials, the closed police reports. She wanted each victim's experience to be traceable from the first letter they received to the moment they signed away what they'd built. She also typed written statements for herself and Serena. The night of the alley, the badges, Booker's hand on Serena's arm, the subsequent report, and its immediate burial. Everything dated, everything sequenced. Then she made a call. She reached out to a former colleague, a detective named Andre Blythe, who had transferred to the city's telecommunications unit 2 years prior. She'd worked 3 cases with him. She trusted him the way you trust someone you've seen make a hard call correctly under pressure. She kept the call brief and indirect. She asked whether, hypothetically, carrier records tied to specific numbers on a specific night could be obtained through a standard interdepartmental records request that wouldn't pass through the deputy commissioner's office. Andre called her back in 40 minutes. The records were in her email. She printed them and laid them on the table. Booker's cell to Cameron's personal number. 11:47 p.m., March 14th. 4 minutes after the twins had raised their badges in the alley. Cameron's personal number to Voss's cell. 11:54 p.m. 7 minutes after that. 3 calls. 3 men. The entire machinery of the cover-up, captured in a carrier log, time-stamped and traceable. Serena looked at the printout for a long moment. They panicked, she said. And they documented it themselves, Simone said. On the third evening, they packed everything into a sealed document case and drove to the FBI's secure intake facility on the north side of the city. Hendry met them in the parking structure, signed the chain of custody forms herself, and took the case from Serena's hands with both of hers. She stood under the parking structure's overhead light and reviewed the cover document. Her eyes moved down the page without rushing. When she reached the bottom, she looked up. "This is enough," she said. "We move next week." She shook both their hands. Firm, brief, certain. The twins drove home through the dark city without speaking. Simone watched the Eastwick buildings pass outside the window, the half-demolished skyline, the development signs, the last few lights still burning in the last few businesses that hadn't been swallowed yet. "Mama would have loved this part," she said softly. Serena kept her eyes on the road. "She's going to love the next part more," she said. The burner phone buzzed at 6:03 a.m. Serena was already awake. She'd been lying on top of the covers the same way she had every night this week, not quite sleeping, not quite not. She picked up the phone and looked at the screen. 2 words from Hendry's number. "It's today." She sat up, swung her legs off the bed, texted Simone before she stood. "Turn on the news. All of it." They watched from Serena's apartment. The first report broke at 9:31 a.m. on the local Atlanta affiliate. A live shot from a reporter standing outside Councilman Bernard Cameron's downtown office building on Peachtree Street. 6 dark FBI vehicles were parked along the front curb. The reporter was saying something about a significant federal law enforcement action. The camera caught 2 agents in blue windbreakers moving through the building's glass lobby doors. Simone stood in the middle of the living room with her arms folded and her eyes fixed on the screen. Serena sat on the edge of the couch and said nothing. At 9:17 a.m., 14 minutes before the news cameras arrived, Hendry told them later. Councilman Bernard Cameron had been arrested at his desk. His assistant had tried to intervene and been calmly redirected by a federal agent. Cameron had asked to call his attorney. He was told he could do that after processing. He was walked through his own office in handcuffs while his staff watched from their desks and did not know where to look. The 4 silent investment partners were arrested simultaneously. 1 at his home in Buckhead, still in his morning robe. 2 at their respective offices, 1 being pulled from his car in a downtown parking garage before he made it to the elevator. Federal agents at all 4 locations at the same moment coordinated to prevent any one of them from warning the others. The charges read at the afternoon press conference were federal, and they were many. Racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, civil rights violations under federal statute, obstruction of justice. Abel Booker's arrest had happened earlier. 6:02 a.m., 1 minute before Hendry's text to Serena, which meant Hendry had sent the message the moment the first cuffs went on. Booker lived in a house in East Atlanta with a 2-car garage and a security light above the front door that flickered on when the FBI vehicles pulled into his driveway. He answered the door himself, probably expecting something else, a delivery, a neighbor, and opened it to find 4 federal agents on his porch in the gray pre-dawn light. He was wearing a bathrobe. His hair wasn't combed. Without the rolled sleeves and the crossed arms and the 10 men arranged behind him, Abel Booker was just a middle-aged man standing in his own doorway, trying to process information his brain didn't want to accept. He didn't say anything when they told him why they were there. He put his hands out. They cuffed him on his own doorstep in his bathrobe, and the security light above the door hummed and flickered the whole time, and not one of his neighbors came outside to watch. Deputy Commissioner Conrad Voss was arrested at the precinct at 10:45 a.m. He had arrived for work at his normal time, parked in his designated spot, and walked into the building with his coffee the way he had for 11 years as deputy commissioner. He made it as far as the third-floor hallway before the federal agent stepped out of the stairwell. The hallway was not empty. Officers who had worked under Voss for years were at their desks, in the corridor, moving between offices. They stopped when they saw the agents. They stopped when they saw the handcuffs. The building went quiet in a way that a building full of law enforcement officers goes quiet. Not with surprise exactly, but with the weight of something that cannot be taken back once it has been seen. Voss walked out in handcuffs past every one of them. Captain Yvonne Draft was standing in the hallway outside her office. She watched him walk past. She didn't speak. She didn't look away. She stood very straight with her hands at her sides, and she watched Conrad Voss walk the length of that hallway and through the door at the end of it, and her face held the steady, composed expression of a woman who had waited a long time for something to be true and was now watching it become true in front of her. By 6 that evening, the story was national. The federal complaint was read publicly at a press conference. 11 businesses named. 11 families named. Every displaced owner listed as a documented victim of a coordinated criminal enterprise. Simone watched the news anchor read Ronald Curtis's name from the federal complaint. She exhaled slowly, long and deep and complete, the way you exhale when you've been holding something for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like not to. "They're in the record now," she said. "Every single one of them." Serena looked at her sister across the dim living room. "Every single one," she said. The misconduct complaint disappeared before the week was out. No formal withdrawal, no press statement, no acknowledgement that it had ever been filed. It simply ceased to exist in the way that fabricated things cease to exist when the people who fabricated them are in federal custody and no longer in a position to protect their own paperwork. The summons came on Friday morning. Both twins, the precinct, 10 o'clock. The new acting deputy commissioner was a woman named Carolyn Haste, who had spent 20 years in financial crimes before moving into administration. She was 61, gray-haired, and spoke with the measured precision of someone who had testified in federal court enough times to understand that every word is a choice. She returned their badges and service weapons across a conference table at 10:12 a.m. She did it without ceremony and without excessive apology, which Serena respected more than either would have felt genuine. Captain Yvonne Draft stood at the side of the room. When the badges were back in their hands, Draft stepped forward and read into the official departmental record, slowly, clearly, with every word landing where it was meant to land, that Detectives Serena and Simone Waverly had acted with integrity and professionalism throughout the entirety of the preceding weeks, that the counter-misconduct complaint filed against them had been a deliberate retaliatory fabrication, coordinated through a chain of command that was now the subject of federal prosecution, that the department was formally recommending commendations for both detectives, effective immediately pending commissioner approval. The commissioner approved them by end of business Friday. The following week, a city inspector from the Office of Independent Oversight, a department that operated entirely outside the chain that Voss had corrupted, conducted a full retroactive review of June's code violations. Every single one was found to be fabricated. The citations had been written against conditions that either didn't exist or had never previously been considered violations in the bar's 20-year operating history. The inspector's written report used the word manufactured twice. It was the kind of language that inspectors chose carefully, and only when they were certain. June's stayed open. In the days after the arrests, something shifted in Eastwick. People who hadn't been back to the neighborhood in years started coming back. Old regulars appeared at the bar on Tuesday nights like they'd never left. A woman drove 40 minutes from the other side of the city because she'd seen Ronald's name read from the federal complaint on the evening news and wanted to sit somewhere that felt like something real. Ronald hung a new photograph behind the bar. He'd found it in a box he kept in the back office, a print he'd had made years ago and never put up because he couldn't decide where it belonged. It was a photograph from 1987. Mama June, 28 years old, laughing at something outside the frame, one hand raised mid-gesture. Beside her, two little girls, 5 years old, identical, both in matching yellow dresses, both looking up at their mother with the complete and uncomplicated adoration of children who don't yet know that the world is complicated. He hung it behind the bar on the wall where everyone could see it. Miss Tessie's contract was voided 10 days after the arrests. The Federal Review found it exactly what it was, signed under documented duress, without adequate independent legal representation, in direct response to coercive threats made by agents of a criminal enterprise. The contract was nullified. The building on Marsh Street remained in the hands of its residents. Miss Tessie remained in apartment 2B. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, the twins came by with groceries. 2 bags each, the heavy kind, the kind their mother used to carry up those same stairs when they were small. Miss Tessie opened the door and made a sound that wasn't quite a word, and pulled them both inside. They sat at her kitchen table, the same window above the sink, the same narrow hallway behind them. Miss Tessie reached across the table and took both their hands in hers, one twin on each side, and held them without saying anything for a long moment. Because some things are too large for words, and the people who love each other well enough know that. That evening, late, after the crowd at June's had thinned, and Ronald had started wiping down the bar, and the music had dropped to something low and easy, the twins slipped out the rear exit. The alley was the same narrow walls, same dim overhead light mounted above the door, humming its low electric hum. Same brick, same shadows at both ends where 10 men had once stood and believed they had already won. Simone looked around slowly, taking it in. 10 of them, she said. Serena looked at her sister, at the face that was her face, at the burgundy she still wore, the same shade as the night this all started. And they never saw us coming, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. They just stood there in the quiet alley in the city at night, 2 daughters, 2 detectives, still standing in the place where someone had decided they could be made to disappear. Then, from inside the bar, music drifted through the closed door. Something old, something slow and warm and unmistakable. Mama June's favorite song. Simone reached back and pushed the door open. The warm light spilled out into the alley, and with it the smell of good food and old wood and people who had come back to a place that was still there. She stepped inside. Serena followed. The door swung shut behind them, and the alley was quiet and still and empty, the way it was always going to end up. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.